I got my revenge on my wife and her lover, but was it worth it? Have you ever wondered how much you can trust the person you love? Imagine this: an endless summer, a life that seems perfect, and suddenly, a message, a simple message that changes everything. This is the story of a betrayal that destroyed a marriage, of secrets that should have never come to light, and of a cold and calculated revenge that will leave you breathless. How far would you go if you discovered that the person you love the most has been lying to you? Could you forgive them? Or would you seek to make them pay for every tear, every lie, every piece of your broken heart? It all started on a summer that seemed endless, the sun shining with an intensity that warmed to the bones, and the air smelled of salt and the sea. We lived in a small coastal town where everyone knew each other, and where secrets, although they tried to be kept, always ended up coming to light. I was happy, or at least I thought I was. I had a stable life, a job I liked, and a wife I loved deeply. Her name was Laura, a woman with dark hair and green eyes that seemed to hide 1,000 stories. We had been married for 5 years, and even though we didn't have children, our relationship seemed solid, full of complicity and those little details that make everything work. But everything changed that damn day in July, the day I discovered that Laura had been unfaithful to me. It wasn't something I suspected overnight, but rather a series of small signs that I ignored, like an idiot, until I couldn't anymore. It started with simple things, like arriving home later from work, vague excuses about meetings or traffic. Then came the calls that she quickly hung up when I entered the room, and finally, the emotional distance. Laura was no longer the same. She no longer looked at me with those eyes full of love. She no longer hugged me as if she never wanted to let me go. And although I tried to talk to her, tried to understand what was happening, she always told me everything was fine, that she was just tired, stressed from work. But I knew something else was going on, something that would destroy me completely. And so it was. One afternoon, while Laura was in the shower, her phone rang. It was a message from a number that had no name, but the content was clear, too clear. "I can't wait to see you tonight, my love." I read that and felt the world crashing down on me. My heart pounded, my hands trembled, and a mix of rage and pain took over me. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it, but there it was, the evidence in that damn message. I waited for Laura to come out of the shower, looked her in the eyes, and showed her the phone. I asked her who it was, demanded she tell me the truth, and after a few seconds that felt like an eternity, she looked down and admitted she had been seeing someone else. I can't describe the pain I felt at that moment. It was as if someone had ripped my heart out and stomped on it in front of me. Laura tried to explain, said it hadn't been planned, that it just happened, but her words meant nothing to me. I couldn't forgive her. I couldn't understand how she could betray me like that. So I made a decision that would change our lives forever. I decided to take revenge, not impulsively, but in a calculated, cold way that would make her feel the same pain I was feeling. And so my plan began. Over the next few weeks, I acted as if nothing had happened, as if I had forgiven Laura, but in reality I was gathering information. I found out that Laura's lover was a man named Carlos, someone she had met at work, a good-looking guy with a smile that surely had won over more than one. But to me, he was nothing but a coward, a man who didn't have the guts to face me, who preferred to hide behind lies and deceit. I followed Carlos, learned his routine, his habits, and found out that not only was he involved with Laura, but he also had a girlfriend, a girl named Sophia, who apparently had no idea what was going on. That's when I saw my opportunity. I decided to approach Sophia, make her believe I was a friend of Carlos, someone who was worried about her, and little by little, I gained her trust. I told her the truth about Carlos and Laura, showed her the evidence I had gathered, and saw how her world crumbled just like mine had. Sophia was devastated, but she was also furious, and together we planned our revenge. We organized a dinner where we would invite Carlos and Laura, a dinner where we would reveal that we knew everything, that we weren't fools, that we wouldn't let them treat us like this. The night of the dinner, everything seemed normal. Carlos and Laura arrived together smiling, as if they had nothing to worry about. But when it came time for dessert, Sophia and I dropped the bomb, showing them the photos, the messages, everything we had gathered. We saw their faces pale, saw them try to deny it, but there was no turning back. We told them we never wanted to see them again, that they should leave our lives forever. And so they did. Carlos and Laura left that night, and although I thought I would feel relief, the only thing I felt was a huge emptiness, an emptiness that I couldn't fill. Because in the end, it didn't matter how much I had gotten my revenge. It didn't matter how much I had made them suffer. Nothing was going to bring back what I had lost. Nothing was going to heal the wounds their betrayal had left in me. And so I was left alone, with my pain and the certainty that love, that feeling I once believed was eternal, was nothing but an illusion that, like everything in this life, sooner or later fades away. The following weeks after that dinner were a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. Although I had gotten my revenge, the emptiness I felt didn't go away. Every night, I would lie in that bed I once shared with Laura and feel how her absence weighed more than ever. The house, which once echoed with her laughter and footsteps, was now a deafening silence. I found myself trapped between the satisfaction of having made them pay and the sadness of losing everything I once had. Carlos and Laura tried to move forward together, or at least that's what I heard through rumors. People in the town started talking, as they always do, the whispers at the market, the looks of pity on the street, the subtle comments at the cafe. Everyone knew what had happened, and although some silently supported me, others saw me as the betrayed husband, the man who couldn't keep his wife. That infuriated me, but I also didn't care. I no longer cared what others thought. All I cared about was moving on, even though I didn't know how. Sophia, on the other hand, became an unexpected ally. After that night, we started seeing each other more often. At first, it was just to talk, to vent to each other about the pain we shared. But over time, our relationship grew closer. Sophia was different from Laura. She was a strong woman, determined, with a gaze that seemed to see through lies. There was something about her that attracted me, something that made me feel alive again, even though I didn't want to admit it. One afternoon, while walking on the beach, Sophia looked at me and said something I'll never forget. We can't let what they did define who we are. We have to find a way to move on, to be happy despite everything. Her words resonated in me, but I wasn't sure I was ready to hear them. I still felt too much resentment, too much pain. However, little by little, I began to open up to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was life after betrayal. Meanwhile, Carlos and Laura were trying to rebuild their relationship, but it wasn't going well. Rumors said they argued constantly, that guilt and resentment were consuming them. Laura had quit her job to avoid more gossip, and Carlos seemed to be growing more distant. Sometimes I would see them in town, walking together but apart, like two strangers sharing a painful past. I couldn't help but feel a kind of satisfaction seeing them like that, but also a deep sadness. After all, Laura had been my wife, the woman I loved with all my heart. One day I received an unexpected call. It was Laura. Her voice trembled on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought about hanging up. But something in her tone stopped me. "I need to see you," she said. "I need to explain some things." I hesitated, but in the end I agreed. We met at a cafe far from the center, a place where no one would recognize us. When I saw her arrive, I was surprised by how different she looked. She had lost weight, her eyes were tired, and her hair no longer shone like before. She seemed like a shadow of the woman I once knew. We sat at a table in the corner, and for a few minutes neither of us said anything. Finally, Laura broke the silence. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she began, "but I need you to know that I'm sorry, really. I never wanted to hurt you." Her words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I wanted to scream at her, tell her it was too late, that her apologies meant nothing. But instead I stayed silent, listening. Laura told me how, as the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting an amber glow across the quiet town, Emma found herself staring out the window of the old bookstore. The weight of her thoughts pressed heavily on her chest, a mixture of longing and uncertainty swirling inside her. The letter she had found earlier that day, tucked inside a dusty, leather-bound novel, had shaken her to the core. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Henry's. Her fingers traced the ink, slightly smudged from time and the touch of many hands before hers. She read the words over and over, trying to understand what they meant. "If you ever find this, it means fate has finally brought you back. Meet me where it all began." Her heart pounded. Could it really be him? After all these years? Emma hadn't spoken to Henry since that summer, the summer when everything had changed. The memories rushed back. Stolen glances between bookshelves, late-night conversations about dreams they never dared to chase, the way he had looked at her the last time they had met. And then he was gone. She had searched for him, asked around, but no one seemed to know where he had disappeared to. Until now. Gripping the letter tightly, Emma knew what she had to do. The only problem was, where had it all begun? Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady her thoughts. The letter in her hands felt like a doorway to a past she had buried long ago. If Henry had left this for her, then he must have known, somehow, that she would return to this place one day. But where had it all begun? Where would she find him after all these years? She closed her eyes, letting the memories flood her mind. It had started in the bookstore, but that wasn't what he meant. No, Henry was speaking of something more profound, somewhere that held deeper significance. And then it hit her. The old bridge. It was where they had spent countless evenings, sitting on the wooden planks, feet dangling above the water, whispering secrets they never dared to say aloud in the daylight. It was where Henry had first told her about his dreams of leaving town, about traveling the world, about making something of himself beyond the limits of their small world. And it was where he had kissed her for the first and last time before disappearing without a word. Emma's fingers trembled as she folded the letter and placed it carefully into her coat pocket. She glanced around the bookstore, the place that had been her refuge since returning home. The scent of aged paper and ink was comforting, but it no longer held the answers she needed. Without another thought, she grabbed her bag and stepped out into the cold evening air. The streets were quiet, only the occasional passing car or the soft hum of distant conversations breaking the silence. As she walked, her mind replayed every moment she had shared with Henry, every question she had asked herself over the years. Why had he left? Why hadn't he tried to find her? And most importantly, why now? The bridge loomed ahead, bathed in the golden glow of the street lamps. It hadn't changed. The wooden planks were still weathered, the iron railings rusted at the edges. It felt frozen in time, just as she had remembered it. Emma hesitated before stepping onto the bridge. Her heart pounded as she walked toward the middle, her eyes scanning the shadows, searching for a figure, a sign, anything. But the bridge was empty. Disappointment settled in her chest. Had she misunderstood? Had she come too late? The letter had no date. Henry could have written it years ago. Maybe this was just another unanswered question in the long list of mysteries he had left behind. She exhaled, leaning against the railing, staring at the water below. The moon reflected off its surface, shimmering like a fragmented memory. You came. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The voice was unmistakable, deep, familiar, filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. She turned slowly, her heart racing. There, standing at the edge of the bridge, was Henry. His hair was a little longer, his face slightly more defined, but his eyes, those same piercing, thoughtful eyes, had not changed. He looked at her with a mixture of relief and hesitation, as if he wasn't sure she would really be there. Emma opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, she took a step forward, then another, until they were close enough that she could see every detail of his face, the way his lips curled slightly at the corners, the way his brow furrowed in the dim light. "I wasn't sure you'd find it," Henry finally said, his voice softer now. Emma swallowed hard. "I wasn't sure either." A silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Emma felt 1,000 questions bubbling to the surface, but none of them seemed enough. Instead, she asked the one thing that mattered most. "Why did you leave?" Henry sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's a long story. I have time." He nodded, glancing out at the water before turning back to her. "I didn't want to leave you, Emma. I never did. But I had no choice." She frowned. "No choice?" "Henry, you vanished. No goodbyes, no explanation. I searched for you." "I know," he said, his voice laced with regret. "I wanted to tell you. But I was protecting you." Emma's stomach tightened. "Protecting me? From what?" Henry hesitated. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he said, "From my past." Emma felt the weight of his words settle between them. She had known Henry had secrets, things he never spoke about, shadows that sometimes clouded his eyes. But she had never pushed, never asked for more than he was willing to give. Now, standing before him after all these years, she realized she needed to know the truth. "Tell me," she said, her voice unwavering. Henry studied her for a long moment before finally nodding. All right, but not here. He held out his hand, and for a brief second, Emma hesitated. Then, without another word, she took it. And just like that, the past came rushing back, and the real story began.